The crying started as a whimper, then exploded into a scream that hijacked the entire first-class cabin. No one dared intervene, not with him holding the baby. But one single mother did, and the moment she stood up, everything changed. But before we get into this wild story, go ahead and like, comment, share, and subscribe, and tell me where you're watching from, so you can help this story reach more people. The baby's screams tore through the first-class cabin with a raw, piercing desperation, sharp enough to ripple through the polished wood panels and rattle the luxury seats. Passengers exchanged irritated looks, shifted in their seats, or pressed fingers hard against their temples. A few looked ready to snap, but no one said a word, because the man holding the baby was not someone you complained to. Marcelo. Even seated, he radiated a silent threat. Tattoos curled up the side of his neck like smoke. His beard framed a jaw locked so tight it looked painful. The suit he wore fit like armor, sleek, dark, expensive, but his eyes betrayed him. There was panic there. Raw. Unmistakable. His 7-week-old son wailed against his chest, tiny fists flailing, face blotchy and red. The child's cry sounded less like fussiness and more like a warning. An infant pushed beyond discomfort into something deeper and more urgent. Marcelo had tried everything. Formula the nanny had packed. Pacifiers the baby spat out with furious determination. Rocking motions so stiff and unpracticed they looked like a man trying to soothe a bomb about to explode. Nothing helped. A flight attendant in a crisp blue uniform approached cautiously, like someone stepping toward a wild animal. "Sir," she whispered, "we can alert the captain. Maybe arrange an early?" "No." Marcelo's voice sliced clean through the air. "We land as scheduled." But the baby didn't care about schedules, reputations, or the dark stories whispered about Marcelo across state lines. The child only knew hunger, discomfort, and the absence of the mother he never got the chance to remember. 3 seats away, Nancy froze mid-breath. The cry. It wasn't background noise to her, it was a shockwave. Her body reacted before her mind could process it. A sympathetic ache pulsed through her chest, a cruel reflex she thought she'd left behind 10 months ago. 10 months since she lost her daughter. 10 months since her world shattered in an instant. 10 months since she walked away from the NICU and the life she'd built. She pressed her hands into the armrests, grounding herself. This wasn't her baby. This wasn't her problem. This wasn't her life anymore. But the cry sharpened, turning frantic, ragged, unmistakably hungry. Her pulse quickened. A flight attendant paused beside her. "Miss, are you all right?" Nancy swallowed hard. "That baby, he sounds..." Her voice trembled. "He sounds like he's starving." The attendant's eyes widened. "Are you a nurse?" Nancy hesitated. It had been so long since she'd said it aloud. "I was," she whispered. "And I see." A flicker of hope crossed the attendant's face. She stepped aside, inviting Nancy into the aisle. Nancy stood, legs shaking as she moved toward the source of the cries. Each step felt heavier than the last, pulling her past grief, past memories, past the mother she used to be. She expected an exhausted father, a stressed parent, maybe someone overwhelmed. Then she saw him. Marcelo looked like a warning carved into human shape. Broad shoulders, neck tattoos. A presence so commanding the air around him felt charged. Power clung to him like a second skin. Danger too. But there, beneath the hardness, was something almost shocking. Fear. Real fear. The baby's cries tore through Nancy again, pushing her forward when she might have turned back. "Sir," the flight attendant murmured, voice barely above a breath. "She's a nurse." She wondered if she might. Marcelo's gaze snapped to Nancy, cold, sharper than knives, assessing her in an instant, the kind of look that warned most people to disappear. But Nancy didn't flinch. She couldn't. Not with that baby screaming like his little body was begging someone, anyone, to understand. "I know that sound," Nancy said softly. "Please, let me take a look." Marcelo's jaw tightened. His breathing stuttered. And for a fraction of a second, his mask cracked, just enough for her to see the terror in his eyes. Another wail burst from the infant, slicing through them both. Nancy stepped closer. Closer to danger. Closer to fate. And as Marcelo looked up at her, not as a feared kingpin, but as a desperate father with nowhere left to turn, the entire cabin seemed to hold its breath. This was the moment everything began to shift. What Nancy didn't know was that approaching Marcelo wasn't simply an act of compassion. It was the first step into a world ruled by blood, loyalty, and an ancient code that would bind her story to his forever. Marcelo's stare hit Nancy like a physical force. Cold, calculating, the kind of gaze that had made grown men confess secrets they swore they'd take to the grave. His eyes dragged over her, assessing, dissecting, searching for weakness or deception. "Who are you?" His voice was low and controlled, dangerous in its quietness. Nancy's breath caught, but she held steady. "Nancy Jackson. I was a NICU nurse for 8 years. Boston General." Was. The word hung between them like an accusation. She swallowed. "I left the field 10 months ago." "Why?" The baby screamed again, and Nancy flinched, not from Marcelo's interrogation, but from the raw desperation in that tiny voice. "Because I lost my daughter," she said quietly. "And I couldn't save her." Something flickered behind Marcelo's eyes. Almost imperceptible, but it was there. Recognition. The shared language of grief. "Your son," Nancy pressed gently, leaning forward just slightly. "He's not fussy. He's starving. That cry, it's specific. I've heard it 1,000 times. His latch might be wrong on the bottle, or the formula isn't sitting right, or his mother died 7 weeks ago." The words came out flat, brutal in their simplicity. Nancy's heart seized. 7 weeks. The same age as the baby. Marcelo's jaw worked as if speaking the truth aloud had cost him something vital. She hemorrhaged during delivery. Didn't make it through the night. His grip on the infant tightened, not rough, but desperate. "I've tried everything. Nannies. Consultants. Different formulas. He won't stop." Nancy saw it then, the exhaustion carved into the lines around his eyes, the tremor in his massive hands, the terror of a man who commanded empires but couldn't soothe his own child. "He's grieving too," Nancy whispered. "Babies know. They feel the loss even if they can't name it." Marcelo's breathing hitched. The baby wailed again, arching his back, face crimson and slick with tears. Nancy's chest ached, that same cruel, biological response she thought had dried up with her milk months ago. But the sensation was unmistakable. Urgent. She looked at Marcelo, weighing her next words carefully. He might be refusing the bottle because it's not what he wants. She paused. Because he's looking for a breast. Marcelo's entire body went rigid. His eyes snapped to hers, sharp, suspicious, disbelieving. "What are you suggesting?" Nancy's pulse hammered in her throat. This was insane. She barely knew what she was suggesting. But the baby's cry tore through her again, and her body responded with a certainty her mind couldn't argue with. "I still have milk," she said quietly. "Not much. Maybe enough." Marcelo stared at her like she'd just spoken a language he didn't understand. The baby's scream crescendoed, higher, sharper, more urgent, and something in Marcelo finally broke. His shoulders sagged. His head dropped forward. And when he looked up at her again, the mask was gone. "Are you offering what I think you are?" His voice cracked on the last word, raw, stripped of all pretense. Nancy nodded once. "Yes." For a heartbeat, neither of them moved. Then Marcelo stood in one fluid motion, cradling his son against his chest with a gentleness that seemed impossible for someone built like a weapon. "The front lavatory," he said, voice low and commanding again. "Now." Nancy's legs felt unsteady as she rose. Every eye in first class turned toward them. Passengers whispered behind raised hands. The flight attendant stepped aside, mouth slightly open, clearly unsure whether to intervene or assist. Marcelo moved into the aisle first, his broad frame cutting a path through the narrow space. Nancy followed. The baby's cries softened slightly, as if sensing, somehow, that something was about to change. As they walked toward the front of the cabin, Nancy felt the weight of 100 stairs pressing against her back. She was walking into the unknown, into intimacy with a stranger, into a moment that would tie her fate to his in ways she couldn't possibly foresee. Behind them, the cabin buzzed with tension. Ahead, the lavatory door waited, and inside Marcelo's arms, a 7-week-old boy whimpered, hungry, desperate, and utterly oblivious to the fact that his need was about to bind two broken souls together in ways neither of them could ever undo. The lavatory door clicked shut behind them, sealing Nancy into a space barely large enough for one person, let alone 2 adults and a screaming infant. Marcelo filled the doorway, blocking out the light, his presence overwhelming in the confined space. He held his son out to her, not gently, but with the desperate urgency of a man drowning. "Please." That single word nearly broke her. Nancy took the baby, her hands trembling so violently she almost feared she'd drop him. The infant's weight settled against her chest, and something ancient and primal stirred inside her, a response her body remembered even when her mind had tried to forget. "I need you to step out," she whispered. Marcelo hesitated, jaw clenched, then nodded once and backed through the door. Alone. Nancy was alone with a stranger's child in a cramped airplane bathroom, about to do something she swore she'd never do again. Her fingers fumbled with the buttons of her blouse. "Don't think. Just move." But the memories crashed into her anyway. The NICU's fluorescent lights. Her daughter's impossibly small body hooked to monitors and tubes. The weight of her baby girl against her chest for the first and last time. The milk that came anyway, cruel, relentless, for a child who would never need it. Nancy's breath hitched, tears blurring her vision as she adjusted the baby against her. "I'm sorry," she whispered, to her daughter, to this stranger's son, to herself. "I'm so sorry." The baby's mouth found her immediately. He latched with a fierce, desperate hunger that stole the air from Nancy's lungs. The crying stopped. Completely. The silence felt sacred. Impossible. Nancy's tears fell freely now, dropping onto the infant's dark hair as he nursed with single-minded determination. His tiny fist curled against her skin. His breathing evened out. The tension in his small body melted away. And for the first time in 10 months, Nancy felt something other than emptiness. Purpose, connection, and life. Outside, Marcelo pressed his back against the lavatory door like a sentinel guarding sacred ground. His hands were fists at his sides, knuckles white, guilt churned in his gut, thick, acidic, suffocating. What kind of father am I? He couldn't feed his own son, couldn't soothe him, couldn't protect him from the most basic need a child could have. A stranger, a woman he didn't know, whose background he hadn't verified, whose motives he couldn't yet understand, was doing what he couldn't. His mind raced through possibilities, calculations, risks. Who is she? Why would she offer this? What does she want? But beneath the paranoia, beneath the cold logic that had kept him alive in a world where trust was fatal, was something raw. It was fear. The bone-deep terror of a man who'd already lost the woman he loved and couldn't survive losing his son too. Minutes stretched into eternity. Then the door opened. Nancy emerged slowly, carefully, the baby sleeping soundly against her chest. His face was peaceful, lips slightly parted, one small hand resting over her heart. Marcelo's breath left him in a rush. His shoulders sagged. His entire body seemed to deflate as relief flooded through him so powerfully it nearly brought him to his knees. He reached out, not for the baby, but toward the child's head, his massive hand hovering just above the soft dark hair as if afraid to break the spell. His fingers trembled. When he finally looked at Nancy, his eyes were wet. "You saved his life." His voice cracked on the words, raw, stripped of all the armor he wore so effortlessly. Nancy shook her head slightly. "I just gave him what he needed." "No." Marcelo's hand dropped to his side. He straightened, and something shifted in his expression. Something ancient and very binding. "What's your full name?" Nancy blinked, confused by the sudden formality. "Nancy Jackson." Marcelo's gaze locked onto hers with an intensity that made the air feel heavy. Nancy Jackson, he repeated, each syllable deliberate, weighted with meaning she couldn't yet decode. I owe you a debt greater than you understand. It wasn't gratitude. It was a vow. A promise spoken in a language older than law, deeper than contracts, binding in ways Nancy couldn't possibly comprehend. Behind them, passengers pretended not to stare. Flight attendants whispered to one another. But in that narrow first-class aisle, something irreversible had been set in motion. Nancy had saved a child's life. And in doing so, she'd unknowingly invoked a code that ran through Marcelo's bloodline like iron through stone. A code that demanded loyalty, protection, and repayment, no matter the cost. As Marcelo gently lifted his sleeping son from Nancy's arms, his eyes never left hers. She didn't know it yet, but she'd just become untouchable. And her life would never be the same. Nancy moved toward her seat, legs still unsteady, but Marcelo's hand closed gently around her wrist. No, he said quietly. Sit with me. It wasn't a request. She glanced at the empty seat beside him, the one that had been conspicuously vacant since boarding, and nodded. Her body was too exhausted to argue, her emotions too raw to process what had just happened. The baby slept soundly in Marcelo's arms now, his breathing deep and even, tiny chest rising and falling with a pace that seemed miraculous compared to 30 minutes ago. How long? Nancy asked softly, settling into the leather seat. How long has he been like this? Marcelo's jaw tightened. 3 days of screaming. Before that, 2 weeks of barely eating. The doctors said he was dehydrated, malnourished. They wanted to hospitalize him, but His voice broke off. I thought I could handle it. Thought the nannies could handle it. You can't force a baby to eat, Nancy said gently. Especially one who's grieving. He's 7 weeks old. How can he grieve something he never knew? Because he did know her. In the womb. Her heartbeat. Her voice. Her presence. Nancy's voice softened. He knows she's gone. Even if he can't understand why. Marcelo stared down at his son, and something in his expression shattered. I killed her. The words came out barely above a whisper. She didn't want to get pregnant. Said it wasn't safe. But I insisted. I wanted an heir. A son. His hand trembled against the baby's back. She bled out because of me. And now I can't even keep him alive. Nancy's chest ached with recognition. The brutal, irrational guilt that came with losing someone you loved. You didn't kill her, she said firmly. Childbirth complications aren't predictable. They're not your fault. Tell that to him when he's old enough to ask where his mother is. Nancy reached out slowly, placing her hand over Marcelo's where it rested on the baby's back. His skin was warm, his knuckles scarred in ways that told stories she probably didn't want to know. He won't blame you, she whispered. He'll just want you to be there. Marcelo's eyes met hers, raw, vulnerable in a way that felt dangerous for a man like him to show. For a moment, the walls between them crumbled. Then footsteps approached. A man in a dark suit leaned down beside Marcelo, his face hard and weathered, eyes sharp. He glanced at Nancy, then at the sleeping baby, and his expression shifted, shock, then something almost reverent. He whispered something in rapid Italian, his tone urgent. Capo, lei ha allattato il bambino. Lei sa cosa significa? Silenzio. Marcelo's voice was a whip crack. His eyes turned to ice. Adesso. The man straightened immediately, jaw clenched, and retreated without another word. Nancy's pulse quickened. What did he say? Nothing important. But Marcelo's grip on his son tightened, and his gaze swept across the cabin, calculating, assessing threats she couldn't see. 3 rows back, 2 men in expensive suits watched with cold, predatory eyes. They whispered to each other, one of them smirking slightly as he studied Marcelo. Nancy felt the shift in the air, the way violence could bloom from stillness without warning. Marcelo noticed. His entire body tensed, shoulders squaring, the sleeping baby somehow making him look more dangerous rather than less. a lion protecting his cub. The men looked away. But Nancy saw it, the crack in Marcelo's armor, the vulnerability his enemies could exploit. She didn't understand the language, the code, the invisible web of power and tradition wrapping around her. What she didn't know was this. In the old Sicilian families, feeding the Don's heir was sacred. It bound you to the bloodline, made you familia, family, in ways that transcended law or logic. It meant protection, loyalty, debt that could never be repaid, and it made you untouchable. But it also made you visible, a target, a complication. The plane shuddered slightly as it began its descent. The seatbelt sign chimed. Nancy's heart hammered as the ground grew closer, reality rushing back in with the changing altitude. Marcelo shifted, his voice dropping to barely above a whisper. "When we land," he said, eyes still scanning the cabin, "my men will escort you." Nancy's stomach dropped. "What? You're not safe on your own anymore." What are you talking about? I'm just going home. I live in—" "You saved my son's life, Nancy Jackson." Marcelo's gaze locked onto hers, heavy with meaning she couldn't decode. "That changes everything." Panic flared hot in her chest. "Marcelo, I don't understand." "You will." The plane descended faster now, engines roaring, the ground rising up to meet them. And Nancy realized with sudden, sickening clarity. She hadn't just saved a baby's life. She'd stepped into a world she couldn't escape. The wheels touched down with a violent jolt. And as the plane taxied toward the gate, Nancy saw 3 black SUVs already waiting on the tarmac. Windows tinted, engines running. Waiting for them. Waiting for her. The moment the plane doors opened, everything moved too fast. Marcelo stood first, his son still cradled against his chest, and gestured for Nancy to follow. She rose on shaking legs, her mind racing, trying to understand what was happening. The jet bridge was empty, cleared, she realized with growing dread. At the gate, 6 men in dark suits formed a wall. Beyond them, through the terminal windows, she could see the black SUVs lined up like predators waiting to strike. "Marcelo, I don't need—" "Stay close." His voice cut through her protest, sharp and absolute. They moved as a unit. Marcelo at the center, Nancy beside him, his men forming a protective box around them. Passengers stared. Airport security watched but didn't intervene. Who is he? The answer terrified her more than the question. Outside, the cold air hit her like a slap. The lead SUV's door opened, and a hand reached out, firm, insistent. "Please, miss." "No." Nancy pulled back, heart hammering. "I have a car. I don't need—" "Get in." Marcelo's voice was gentle but unyielding. He was already settling into the vehicle with his son, and the man's grip on her elbow tightened, not painful, but impossible to escape. "I'm not going with you." "Nancy." Marcelo looked at her from inside the SUV, his eyes tired but resolute. "You're not being taken. You're being protected." "From what?" "From men who would use you to get to me." Before she could respond, she was guided, pushed, into the vehicle. The door slammed shut. The locks engaged with a decisive click. Nancy's breath came in short, panicked gasps. The convoy moved in perfect synchronization, pulling away from the airport with military precision. "Let me out." Her voice cracked. "Please. I just want to go home." "You will," Marcelo said quietly, adjusting his sleeping son. "When it's safe. This is kidnapping. This is protection." His jaw tightened. "There's a difference." "Not to me." One of the men in the front seat spoke in Italian, his tone deferential. Marcelo responded sharply, and Nancy caught only fragments, words that meant nothing to her but seemed to carry weight she couldn't measure. The ride felt endless. When they finally stopped, Nancy's stomach lurched. The estate loomed before them, gates that looked bulletproof, stone walls that seemed designed to keep the world out. Or keep people in. She was ushered through marble halls, past men who stood like statues, their eyes tracking her every movement. The opulence was suffocating, old-world money, power carved into every corner. Wait here, Marcelo said, nodding toward an ornate sitting room. He disappeared with his son, leaving Nancy alone with 2 guards stationed outside the door. She wasn't a guest. She was a prisoner. Nancy paced the room, her mind spinning, trying to find a way out, trying to understand how a single act of compassion had led to this nightmare. Then she heard voices. "Hello, urgent. Italian." She moved toward the doorway, pressing herself against the wall, straining to hear. Nancy's breath stopped. She didn't speak Italian, but she understood enough. "Old laws. One of us. Protection." One of the men laughed, not cruelly, but with a kind of reverent disbelief. "Family." Nancy's knees buckled. She stumbled back, hand pressed to her mouth to keep from crying out. "What have I done?" "Listening at doors, Nancy?" She spun around. Marcelo stood in the doorway, his expression unreadable. His son was gone, probably with a nanny now, and without the baby, he looked every inch the dangerous man she'd feared from the beginning. "Let me go." Her voice shook. "Please, I don't want any part of this." Marcelo stepped closer, and she backed away until her shoulders hit the wall. But he didn't touch her. He just looked at her, really looked, with something that might have been regret. "You saved my son's life," he said quietly. "In my world, that means something. It binds you to us. To him. Whether you understand it or not. I don't want to be bound to anything." "I know." His voice softened, and for a moment he looked almost human. Almost kind. "You belong to no one, Nancy Jackson. Not to me. Not to my family. Not to anyone." Relief flooded through her. "But I will protect you," he continued, and the relief evaporated. "Whether you want it or not. That's not protection." Nancy whispered, her voice breaking. "That's captivity." Marcelo's jaw tightened. He turned toward the door, then paused, glancing back at her over his shoulder. "You'll understand soon enough," he said. "The world you stepped into when you helped my son, it doesn't let people go." The door closed behind him. The lock turned. And Nancy sank to the floor, trembling, realizing with horrifying clarity. She'd become untouchable. But she'd also become trapped. And Marcelo Conti, whether savior or captor, wasn't going to let her walk away. 3 days. That's how long Nancy had been living in Marcelo Conti's mansion before she stopped counting the hours until escape and started counting the moments the baby smiled. The nursery was a contradiction, soft pastels and expensive mobiles hanging above furniture that probably cost more than her yearly salary. She'd been given a room adjacent to it, connected by a door that was never locked. Because she wasn't a prisoner, as Marcelo kept insisting. Even though she couldn't leave. The baby, who she'd learned his name was Luca, had latched onto her with a fierce, desperate attachment. Every feeding was easier than the last. Every time she held him, his tiny fists clutched her shirt like she was the only solid thing in his universe. And despite everything, the fear, the anger, the wrongness of it all, Nancy couldn't help but fall for him too. Marcelo watched. Always watching. He'd appear in the nursery doorway at odd hours, leaning against the frame, arms crossed, his expression unreadable. Sometimes he'd stay for minutes. Sometimes just seconds before disappearing again into the labyrinth of his dangerous world. One evening, Nancy was rocking Luca to sleep, humming softly, when she felt that familiar weight of observation. "You're good with him," Marcelo said quietly from the shadows. Nancy didn't startle anymore. "He's easy to love. My wife used to hum that song." His voice cracked slightly. "How did you know?" "I didn't." Nancy looked up, meeting his eyes. Some songs just feel like lullabies. Something passed between them, recognition, grief, understanding. Marcelo stepped closer, reaching out to touch Luca's tiny hand. His son's fingers instinctively wrapped around his father's scarred knuckle. "Thank you," Marcelo whispered. Nancy nodded, unable to speak past the lump in her throat. But the tenderness never lasted long. Not in a world built on blood and loyalty. Nancy saw things she wasn't supposed to see. Men arriving at midnight with briefcases and grim expressions. Conversations conducted in rapid Italian that stopped the moment she entered a room. Guns, so many guns, casually displayed on hips in shoulder holsters. Resting on tables like ordinary objects. Once, she'd walked past Marcello's study and glimpsed him through the cracked door, standing over a man on his knees, Marcello's voice cold and final as death. She'd backed away slowly, heart hammering, and didn't sleep that night. But even more unsettling was how Marcello's men treated her. Doors opened before she reached them. Her meals appeared without asking. When she walked through the halls, conversations stopped and heads bowed slightly, not mockingly, but with something that looked disturbingly like reverence. "Why do they look at me like that?" she'd asked Marcello one morning. He'd paused over his espresso. "Like what?" "Like I'm sacred." His jaw tightened. "In a way you are." "That's insane." "That's tradition." He set down his cup. "You fed my heir, Nancy, my son. In the old families, that makes you untouchable, protected, honored. It makes me trapped. It makes you alive." His eyes darkened. "There are men who would have killed you on that plane if they'd known what you'd done. Rivals who would use you to hurt me. This." He gestured to the mansion around them. "This is the only reason you're still breathing." Nancy's blood ran cold. The proof came 2 days later. A message delivered to the estate, handwritten, sealed with wax, left at the gate by someone who disappeared before security could react. Nancy didn't see the letter, but she saw Marcello's face after he read it. Fury and fear in equal measure. Double the perimeter. He'd barked at his men. "No one in or out without my clearance." That night, 3 more guards appeared outside her door. "What's happening?" Nancy had demanded when Marcello checked on Luca. "Precaution. Tell me the truth." Marcello's eyes met hers, sharp, calculating, but beneath it, something raw. "The Rossi family sent a message. They know about you. They know what you mean to us now." He moved closer, his voice dropping. "They're testing boundaries. Seeing if I'll protect you the way tradition demands. And will you?" Without question. The certainty in his voice should have comforted her. Instead, it terrified her, because she was no longer Nancy Jackson, and see you nurse from Boston. She was a piece on a chessboard she didn't understand, in a game played with bullets and blood. Luca began crying from his crib. Nancy moved instinctively, lifting him, settling into the rocking chair. He quieted immediately against her chest, tiny fingers curling into her shirt. Marcello watched from the doorway, his expression stripped of all pretense. "I don't know how to live without fearing for him," he said quietly. It wasn't a confession. It was a plea. Nancy looked up at this dangerous, broken man who'd pulled her into his nightmare and realized something that made her stomach twist. She was beginning to understand him, and that was the most dangerous thing of all. "Then stop living in fear," she whispered, "and start living for him." Marcello's throat worked. He nodded once, barely, and disappeared into the darkness of the hallway, leaving Nancy alone with a sleeping baby and the growing realization. She wasn't just protecting Luca anymore. She was being woven into the very fabric of a family that would never let her go. The explosion shattered the night. Nancy jolted awake, heart hammering, ears ringing from the blast that rattled the mansion's bones. For a heartbeat, she couldn't process what was happening. Then Luca started screaming. She was out of bed and running before conscious thought caught up, bare feet slapping against cold marble, adrenaline flooding her system as alarms shrieked through the hallways. Gunfire erupted somewhere below. Automatic weapons. Multiple shooters. Nancy burst into the nursery and scooped Luca from his crib, clutching him against her chest as he wailed in terror. His tiny body trembled, and she pressed his face into her shoulder, trying to muffle the sounds of chaos. "Shoo, baby, shoo. I've got you." The door exploded inward. Nancy screamed, but it was Marcello, chest heaving, blood already streaking his shirt, a gun in each hand. "Safe room. Now." His voice was steel. "East wing, 3rd door past the library. Code is 0724. "What's happening?" "Rossi." He grabbed her arm, propelling her into the hallway. "They're here for you." Terror spiked through her. "Marcelo! Go!" More gunfire. Closer now. Marcelo shoved her forward and spun back toward the stairs, already firing. Nancy ran. The mansion had become a war zone, smoke thick in the air, men shouting in Italian, glass shattering, the acrid smell of gunpowder burning her throat. She clutched Luca tighter, his screams muffled against her chest as she sprinted past paintings and statues that seemed obscene in their opulence while bullets tore through the walls. Behind her, Marcelo's voice cut through the chaos. Protect the woman and the baby. Above all else. Even his own life. Nancy's eyes burned with tears as she ran. East Wing. Library. The door. Her hands shook as she punched in the code, 0724, and the heavy steel door hissed open. The safe room beyond was small, reinforced, lined with monitors showing security feeds and supplies stacked against the walls. She stumbled inside, gasping for air. A body slammed against the door behind her. Nancy spun, heart-stopping. Through the narrow gap, she saw Marcelo, on his knees, blood pouring from his shoulder, his side, fighting off two men with brutal efficiency even as he bled out. He looked up. Their eyes met. "Close it," he roared. "No." One of the attackers raised a gun. Marcelo twisted, taking the bullet meant for Nancy. The punch through his chest. He crumpled. "Marcelo." Nancy didn't think. She shoved Luca into the corner of the safe room, screaming at him to stay, then lunged back through the door. Gunfire erupted around her. She grabbed Marcelo's arm, God. He was heavy, and pulled with strength born of pure terror. His body dragged across the threshold. She kicked the door. It sealed with a hydraulic hiss just as bullets slammed into the exterior. Silence. Nancy's ears rang. Luca was screaming. And Marcelo wasn't moving. No. No, 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 no. Nancy dropped to her knees beside him, hands hovering over the blood spreading across his chest. So much blood. Too much. Her training kicked in through the panic. Pressure. Stop the bleeding. She tore at his shirt, revealing the entry wound, high on his left chest, dangerously close to his heart. The exit wound at his back was worse. "Stay with me," she begged, pressing her hands against the wounds. Blood seeped between her fingers, hot and relentless. "Marcelo, stay with me." He didn't respond. Nancy's vision blurred with tears as she worked, using supplies from the safe room's medical kit, packing the wounds, wrapping pressure bandages with shaking hands. "You don't get to die," she sobbed. "You hear me? You don't get to bring me into this nightmare and then die. You have a son. Luca needs you. I need you to wake up." The monitors showed the battle continuing outside, Marcelo's men pushing back the attackers, slowly regaining control. But in here, time moved differently. Nancy worked for what felt like hours, checking pulse, breathing, treating shock, doing everything her years of training had taught her while Luca cried himself into exhausted silence in the corner. "Please," she whispered, forehead pressed against Marcelo's shoulder. "Please don't leave him. Don't leave us." His chest rose, rose again. Then his hand moved. Barely. Nancy's head snapped up. Marcelo's eyes opened, barely slits, unfocused, but open. "Nancy." His voice was a broken rasp. "I'm here." She leaned closer, her face inches from his, tears falling freely. "I'm here. You're okay. You're going to be okay." His hand found hers, grip weak but desperate. "I thought." He swallowed hard, each word clearly agonizing. "I thought I'd lose you." Nancy's breath caught. "Not I thought I'd die. I thought I'd lose you." Their faces were so close she could feel his breath, shallow, labored, but there. "You didn't," she whispered. "I'm right here." His thumb brushed across her knuckles, the smallest gesture that carried the weight of everything he couldn't say. Outside, the gunfire finally stopped. Inside, something shifted, and Nancy realized with terrifying clarity. She'd stopped wanting to escape. She'd started wanting to stay. Dawn broke through the safe room's reinforced walls like a promise. Nancy had been awake all night, monitoring Marcelo's breathing, checking his bandages, feeding Luca when he woke hungry and confused. Her body ached with exhaustion, but her mind wouldn't let her rest. The monitors showed men moving through the estate, Marcelo's reinforcements, sweeping for threats, clearing bodies, securing the perimeter. It was over. For now. Marcelo stirred, wincing as consciousness dragged him back from the edge. His eyes found Nancy immediately, as if confirming she was real. Luca? Sleeping. Nancy nodded toward the corner where the baby lay on a makeshift bed of blankets. He's okay. We're both okay. Marcelo's jaw clenched, and she saw it, the wave of relief so powerful it nearly broke him. You saved my life, he said hoarsely. You took a bullet for me. I would take 1,000. The simplicity of his statement stole her breath. Nancy stood abruptly, putting distance between them, her emotions too raw and tangled to process. I never asked for this, she said, her voice cracking. I never asked to be pulled into your world, to be hunted, to watch you almost die. I know. I just wanted to help a baby. I know. Marcelo pushed himself up slowly, teeth gritted against the pain. And I never asked for love, or loss, or to become a father without the woman I loved. His eyes locked onto hers. But I cannot change what I feel now. Nancy's heart hammered. What are you saying? That you terrify me. He said it like a confession. That my son trusts you more than anyone in this world. That I. He trailed off, jaw working as if the words physically hurt. That I fear losing you more than I fear death. The air between them felt charged, dangerous. You don't even know me, Nancy whispered. I know you ran toward gunfire to save my son. I know you dragged me to safety when you should have locked that door and survived. I know you've cried for a daughter you lost while caring for mine. He paused. I know enough. Nancy's eyes burned with unshed tears. I'm not her. Your wife. I can't replace her. I'm not asking you to. Marcelo's voice softened. I'm not asking you for anything, Nancy. I'm just telling you the truth. The vulnerability in his eyes was almost unbearable to witness. This man, who commanded empires built on fear, who killed without hesitation, who wore violence like a second skin, was offering her something more dangerous than any weapon, his heart. And she didn't know what to do with it. A knock on the safe room door broke the moment. Capo, a voice called through the steel. The estate is secure. Marcelo's mask slid back into place. Commander, leader. But when he looked at Nancy, something softer lingered in his gaze. We should go. The mansion looked like a war zone. Bullet holes scarred the walls. Blood stained the marble. Glass crunched under their feet as they walked through hallways that had been pristine just hours ago. Nancy carried Luca, who'd finally settled into exhausted sleep against her shoulder. Marcelo moved beside her, slower than usual, one hand pressed against his bandaged ribs. Men parted as they passed, bowing their heads, relief evident on their faces at seeing their Don alive. But their eyes lingered on Nancy. With something beyond reverence now. Gratitude. She'd saved him. Protected the heir. Earned her place in ways no outsider ever had. They reached the nursery, miraculously untouched by the violence. Nancy settled Luca into his crib, adjusting his blankets with gentle precision. When she turned, Marcelo was watching from the doorway. The morning light caught him differently, highlighting the exhaustion in his face, the silver threading through his dark hair, the humanity beneath the monster everyone feared. You should rest, Nancy said softly. You lost a lot of blood. So did you save mine. She crossed to him slowly. That's what nurses do. We save people. Is that all this is? His voice was barely above a whisper. Professional obligation. Nancy's hand moved without conscious thought, reaching up to touch the edge of his bandage where it peaked above his collar. His breath hitched at the contact. I don't know what this is, she admitted. But it's not obligation. Marcelo's hand covered hers, holding it against his chest where his heart beat strong and steady beneath the bandages. Neither do I, he said. But I know I want you here. Not because of tradition or protection or debt. His thumb stroked across her knuckles. Because when I look at you with my son, I see something I never thought I deserved. What? A family. The word hung between them, fragile and terrifying and impossibly hopeful. Behind them, Luca stirred, making soft sounds in his sleep. Nancy looked at the baby, then back at Marcello, seeing him clearly for the first time. Not the violence. Not the danger. Not the mafia boss whose world ran on blood and loyalty. Just a man, broken by loss, terrified of failing his son, falling for a woman who'd stumbled into his nightmare and somehow made it bearable. I'm scared, Nancy whispered. So am I. His forehead touched hers, the gentlest gesture from a man built for brutality. And in the quiet of that nursery, with dawn breaking and danger temporarily held at bay, something shifted between them. Not quite love. Not yet. But something deeper than safety. Something that felt dangerously close to home. Marcello stepped back slowly, as if leaving required physical effort. Rest, he said. I'll have guards posted outside. You're safe here. We're all safe here, Nancy corrected. His eyes held hers for a long moment. Then he nodded and disappeared into the hallway, leaving Nancy alone with a sleeping baby and the terrifying realization. She didn't want to leave anymore. She wanted to stay. And that changed everything. 3 days after the attack, Marcello found Nancy in the nursery, rocking Luca to sleep with that same lullaby she didn't know his wife had hummed. Come with me, he said quietly. There's something I need to show you. Nancy hesitated, then carefully transferred the sleeping baby to his crib. She followed Marcello through the mansion's maze of hallways, past guards who nodded respectfully, until they reached a door she'd never noticed before. Beyond it lay a garden. Not the manicured lawns visible from the main terrace, but something hidden, intimate. Roses climbed ancient stone walls. A fountain whispered in the center. Morning light filtered through olive trees, casting dappled shadows across weathered benches. It was beautiful. Painfully so. Isabella loved this place, Marcello said, his voice rough with memory. She'd spend hours here. Said it was the only part of my world that felt clean. Nancy's chest tightened. Marcello, I need to tell you the truth. He turned to face her, and the vulnerability in his eyes nearly undid her. About the code. About what you mean to this family. Nancy wrapped her arms around herself, suddenly cold despite the warm morning. I know I'm supposed to be protected. That feeding Luca made me sacred or something. You're not my property, Nancy. The words came fierce, urgent. That's what I need you to understand. The old code, it doesn't make you owned. It makes you sacred, untouchable. Family. He stepped closer. It means I would destroy anyone who tries to hurt you. That my blood and my honor are bound to your safety. But it doesn't mean you belong to me. Then why can't I leave? Because you'd be dead within a week. His jaw clenched. The Rossi family knows your face now. So do their allies. They know that hurting you would destroy me more effectively than any bullet. His voice dropped. So yes, I've kept you here. Against your will. And I'd do it again to keep you breathing. Nancy's throat burned. That's still captivity. I know. Marcello's hand lifted, hovering near her face before falling back to his side. But I'm hoping that maybe one day it won't feel like prison anymore. The fountain whispered between them. You said the code makes me family, Nancy said quietly. But that's not why you want me here, is it? Marcello's composure cracked. No. The word came out broken. It's not. Then why? He looked at her like she was the only thing in the world that mattered. Because you don't belong to me, Nancy Jackson? His voice shook. But I belong to you. Nancy's breath stopped. Every time you hold my son, every time you look at me like I'm more than the violence I've built my life on, every time you choose to stay in that nursery when you could demand your freedom. He swallowed hard. You own pieces of me I didn't know I still had. Tears blurred Nancy's vision. I lost everything, Marcello. My daughter. My career. My purpose. I don't know how to be someone's salvation. You already are. He stepped closer, close enough that she could see the gold flecks in his dark eyes. You saved my son's life. You're teaching me how to be the father he deserves. You're showing me that the man I am doesn't have to be the only man I can be. I'm not her. Nancy whispered. Your wife. I know. And Luca isn't my daughter. I know that too. Nancy's hands trembled. Then what is this? Something new. Marcello's hand finally touched her face, gentle, reverent, as if she might shatter. Something neither of us expected. Something that terrifies me more than any enemy ever has. Nancy leaned into his touch despite every logical reason not to. I'm scared, she admitted. So am I. A cry echoed from the mansion. Luca, awake and demanding attention. They both smiled despite themselves. We should. Nancy started. Yeah. They walked back together, side by side, and when they reached the nursery, Luca was standing in his crib, chubby hands gripping the rail, face blotchy from crying. But the moment he saw them, both of them, together, his expression transformed. He reached out. Not to Nancy. Not to Marcello. But to both of them at once, small arms stretching wide enough to encompass them both, as if his infant heart understood what they were still struggling to name. Family. Nancy lifted him, and when Luca's other hand immediately grabbed for Marcello's finger, something clicked into place. Marcello's arm came around Nancy's shoulders, pulling her close as he pressed a kiss to his son's head. The three of them stood there, broken pieces finding a way to fit together, creating something whole from the shattered remains of separate tragedies. Thank you, Marcello whispered against her hair. Nancy closed her eyes, letting herself lean into this dangerous, impossible, beautiful thing they were building. For what? For stepping into that aisle? His voice was thick with emotion. For being brave enough to approach a monster. For saving my son. For saving me. Nancy turned her face into his shoulder, breathing in smoke and cologne and something uniquely him. You're not a monster, she said softly. With you and Luca? His arms tightened around them both. Maybe I don't have to be. Marcello Conti had built an empire on fear. He'd commanded loyalty through violence, respect through power, obedience through the constant threat of death. He never expected salvation to come mid-flight, delivered by a grieving nurse with gentle hands and a fierce heart. He never imagined that the woman who silenced his baby's cries would be the one to silence the chaos in his soul. But as dawn broke over the garden Isabella once loved, with Nancy in his arms and his son between them, Marcello finally understood. Some debts could never be repaid. Some bonds could never be broken. And some families were forged not in blood, but in the desperate, beautiful act of saving each other. If this story pulled you in, if you felt even a little of what Nancy and Marcello went through, then show some love. Like, comment, share, and subscribe for more touching stories. Your support is what keeps me going. Thank you. Until next time.